All right, please continue, Judith. Thank you.
So, so this is the action, the normal voting action in the election. Like I'm assuming, there will be more parameters there and things like that. This is just to showcase, how these badges can be issued from within the code automatically. So whatever logic it would have, it would probably it's still here, all the election logic. And then there's this event tables that I had created. Again, just as an example, we really need to see how we would code it for Eden. So what I've done in this table is captured events and the badge which needs to be issued on occurrence of these events. So like in this case, it would be vote. So what I'm doing is looking into this events table and finding this vote, and then what badge is for vote action. So the way of real, I think it would be helpful if we look at this table real quick. So events table is like this: event, and then there is a badge. Like on this event, issue this badge, kind of storing an event to badge mapping. So having a table like this would be helpful. Let's say we want to issue a badge on induction when somebody is resigning from the community, or from somebody is removed from the community. So all of these things can be kind of captured in this events table. This is just one way of coding, how to, instead of hard coding badge that, on voting that, give this badge, it's storing it in the database. Now, so this is the action that is being called. Once this action is called, it will give this badge, whatever badge it was, to the voter, whoever signed this voting action.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So from what you're saying, it seems like the specific application of minting an NTT upon voting needs to be coded still. Like you're showing us a general framework, but the logic of that still needs to be added to this. Is that correct?
So there are two. I'll try to answer and then see if it answers your question. So so there are two parts in so I don't haven't used the word mint and all but how I see a thing look at these things is first you create or define a badge, and then you issue a badge. So this part is the issuance part. So this voter is issued this badge, and then the creation part is a different action which won't reside in this elections code. So this is just specifically the elections dummy code that I've created.
Okay, so the entity is already created, let's say. It's created beforehand, and this just sends it.
Yeah, this just sends it. Now, yeah, we'll move to I think the next part is actually moving to how to create these entities. So this is the issuance part, this is how we issue. Now to create an entity, so there is this org interface which Eden needs to deploy, or any org that uses this framework needs to deploy it for themselves. There are few setup steps for this. I'll try to go over them now, and then I'll tie it back to that giving of badge. So this action was being called earlier, from that code. So this is what we will type back to. So to call this action, a badge needs to be defined. And this is how you define a badge, initialize a simple badge, who is the creator. So this will probably be a human actor. Maybe it can be chief delegate, HCD, or whoever is the authorized part or authorized person. and then it calls certain action. So no code changes needed here. It can just be deployed like this. But what's important is this part, checks contract. So what this contract, so how does require recipient work? Like I'll probably go over it. Maybe all of us know it, but still I'll go over it. So what it will do is, um, it will pass all these parameters, whatever is there, to this contract. Like, this checks contract is a function here. I'll go over it, like, what it is, but it's sort of a, you can say, another contract. And then there is this third contract that Eden will have to implement. So I'll keep on switching between these different contracts, and then maybe feel free to, like, stop me in case something doesn't make sense. So this Eden validate contract is the checks contract, is the sample checks contract. Now, if we see here, this is so I had created this dummy org earlier, like NFT circle.gm or something. So it would be something like Eden org in our case. And then what it's gonna do is it's going to call this action here, simple create check. And the simple create check just checks one thing here, that for this creator, like whoever is creating this entity, whether that person has a sim creator role or not. Like basically it's sort of a way to authorize a person. Not anybody can create these badges. They have to be assigned a role. So going back to this part here, hidden validate, which was that? Sorry, I have too many of these here. I think it was org contract, yes. So to define a badge, this action needs to be called by some person, like, person of authority. And then that authority is being checked over here, whether that person is actually authorized or, it is just somebody trying to hack the system. And this part calls this, the other code, which does all the heavy lifting of maintaining information about entity creation, this part and this part. So basically, these part is something that, we can safely, safely ignore to understand at the moment, like, not needed for any understanding. So, and how do we create this checks contract? Like, so this is, so trying to sum it up till now. So till now, what we have done, so we have we have looked at three contracts that for Eden. So one is this election contract. This is where like, this issuance happens. So this is the contract that already is, like, used for elections right now. And then there are two contracts that Eden would have to deploy. So first one is this org contract. It makes, so this acts as an interface to the rest of the issuance entity distribution system that we have. So this is what Eden will have to deploy. And then there is this third contract, the validation contract, that we had looked at, where all the inputs can be validated, whether somebody is authorized and things like that. So I think the next, any questions till now? Is it making sense?
Just to be clear, so every instance that uses the Antelope badges framework has to deploy contracts for that instance. It's not like a shared contract which all implementations of the framework can leverage. Rather, each instance that uses this framework has to deploy their own set of contracts for it.
Yes. So so what we had, so the short answer is yes. So what we had looked at is all the non-shared instances, like the shared instances have not gone over, like all these things that I was saying that we can safely ignore. Those are shared instances. We don't need to like understand them like in depth at this moment. So there are two contracts that every org will have to deploy. One in which this org.cp, in which org won't have to do any change. So let's say there is IDEN 1 and IDEN 2, they can directly deploy these contracts in this contract into two different accounts. So IDEN 1 will have a different contract and IDEN 2 will have a different one. They won't have to do any code changes. The code changes would be, so both the orgs will have to create their own IDEN validate contract. So over there, they'll have to even write their code as well. So earlier there so one is, so
Right, because different people are authorized to create the NTT, so therefore different EDENs would have to code this differently. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, validation is like, it's org dependent, how they want to validate and stuff. So yeah, this is IDEN dependent. So I'm thinking what would be the next ideal step. So maybe the next step could be I can kind of try to run this on Jungle 4 and see like, whether all these things work as expected or not.
Javier, is it just a matter of seeing how this works in Jungle 4 and then go from there?
Yeah, I mean, deploying additional contracts is okay. We can do that with like our active, CD keys, and we'd have to create new accounts that the CDs control that control these contracts. And then the election contract would need to be modified to trigger those actions on those contracts to mint the NTTs. I'd like to kind of understand the Antelope badges. The idea is to provide like a standardized framework for issuing badges that can be then recognized across several communities in the Antelope space, and also like, I guess, simplify the design because we're adhering to a convention, I guess, to create these. Because the way the contract does it now is just go straight to atomic assets and mints them there, right? And we do that straight from our smart contracts. This adds like more complexity, and I like the idea of separating concerns in a way, like having different contracts do different things and not bundle everything in the same contracts. Now, I guess what my question is which other ways do we see Eden leveraging this tool in the future? Because right now we're focusing on Sybil protection, and we want to have these entities for the Sybil protection feature we're building. But in the future, it might be useful to reutilize what we've done now for other types of badges or entities or NFTs that can be minted if I participated in an election, if I resigned, like you say, if I inducted someone. So I'm think that the best way to really get the most out of this is if we have like a list of use cases for Eden where this can be leveraged, and then we can reutilize what we've done, which kind of justifies adding all this framework in there, right? The induction badges are currently minted directly at Atomic Assets, and perhaps that's something that later on can be substituted for an approach like this. But I'm thinking, okay, if all we want is the soulbound token, we can issue that in a very similar way of how the induction tokens are done using the directly communicating with Atomic Assets. If we go this route, and that's what we want to do, I mean, we totally want to like support other Eden members projects and build off what you guys are doing. I think it makes more sense if there's more things down the road that this can be used for. And I mean, that's kind of how I see it. Like, this is more of a standard or convention that can help issue tokens in a way where they can be easily recognized outside of Eden and in a broader kind of Antelope space.
Yeah, Javier. So, and I'll let Mo speak to this, but if you look at their Pomelo grant from last season, I'm sure it's going to be on this season too. They have a ton of other use cases that they're seeing for this. And I think that's already documented. So I think if that's your concern to justify adding the contracts, I think that's sufficiently done already. But yeah, go ahead, Mo or Sajid.
Yeah. So one of the chief or main use cases for entities are like, I think Mo had spent considerable amount of time on that, is sort of reputation building. And the reputation and this reputation, like, within an org can be built separately. Like, if everybody starts coding their own reputation system, like, they will have some sort of reputation built within that system. So for effectively sharing reputation across organizations, the framework that we have is going to be very handy. What it does is, apart from storing the information in atomic asset, like what Eden does right now, it stores these badges information in a cumulative way. An example would be how many election has somebody participated in. So, all this information is stored cumulatively. So that's another benefit. And then there is this third benefit that let's say at some point in time, we want to let's say reward tokens based on somebody's participation. So it also helps in like kind of generating org-wide scores of various members, and then they can sort of piggyback on lots of code. But Javier, I see your questions as valid questions. Like, if we just think of this use case of like issuing SBT to atomic assets. So I think if we just think that only that much, then yeah, there is a shortcut. Like, let's just include it into Eden code, and then we should be good. But let's say, like, we have to issue along with atomic asset into some other future entity framework, let's say simple assets or any other asset. Let's say we move to other Antelope based chain where atomic assets is not the primary framework. It could be something else. Over there, this would enable creation of SBTs over there. So kind of that's the idea behind modularization and like kind of separation of concerns. Like, really coding it into pieces. And then I think what we will do at some point in time, maybe in this call, or like, I don't know if we'll if you're not able to like, go over everything, we'll try to go over the framework and kind of build understanding on why it is coded that way, and what are the benefits. And maybe like I hope at that point in time you will be sort of convinced that this is probably the right way to, or like, this way has a certain advanced benefits. So
So I gotta from what I'm gathering here, so I'm just trying to get the shortest route, because we want to get this for the next election. It seems to me like the next step would be, does this work? Like, are there bugs in the code, like testing on Jungle? Like this seems like the next step. And can we do that? I guess.
Oh yeah, I think yeah, definitely. I think that part is we had earlier kind of tested it on mainnet as well. On Jungle, this is deployed and sort of.
When's the last time you tested it?
It was a couple of months back, and I think I tested it over the weekend as well. So it worked but extensive testing a couple of months back.
So what does that look like? Or, Sajid or Javier, what do we need to see now in terms of the level of testing before we can bring this forward?
I think I think personally, I feel the first step is to understand, like, what is being integrated. So like, what is this thing that's available, right? So I think once that is understood, then like the integration code, I had already like, shown the sample, how this integration code would look like, right from elections part, calling this action and things like that. So integration part is sort of not that involved in my opinion. But the ideal next step is, let's say, if you don't want to understand what else is going on here, so it's just like, directly integrating and kind of testing it on Jungle 4.
Okay, Javier, how are you thinking of proceeding at this moment?
So we've got a version of Eden on Jungle 4 running right now with a remove member action, which are the changes we've made since the deltas we have from what's in production. The other thing is that we would like to have plenty of time to test and run a few mock elections. So that's going to take time. I don't think coding is going to be terribly complex, especially if we have Sashit's help with the init process and the config of the other contracts. I want to go this route because I think that there's a lot of value in collaborating amongst us and having this 1 + 1 = 3 approach, and then also helping you guys use Eden as a platform to propagate this work you've been doing, right? So we want to like support you guys with this. If you say that the code is functional and you've run some tests and it works, then we can begin to implement it and then run some more tests. We've got roughly a month to do that, right? So that's where I'm a little like, I mean, my worst case scenario is like, okay, it's election time, everyone shows up, and then the thing crashes, and everyone's got to go back home, and we don't have a chief delegates at the end of the day. For me, that's like the worst. That's I don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, I think so. Great points. Great points. I think what we should do is we should test it early and see, like, whether it works fine or not. And then, like, minor bugs, feel free to message me. Usually I'm active on Telegram, or so you can DM me, and I'll like I'll try to respond to it as soon as possible. So yeah, basically I'll be there to help you in this integration. In short, like the thing means I won't jump into the hidden code, but like I had created these what do you call it, patterns on how it can be integrated, and then once you code these and it, let's say, hits the framework, the code hits the framework, and if there is anything wrong there, I'm kind of ready to help as much as possible.
Okay, so it sounds like we can start testing this on the Eden instantiation on Jungle 4, Javier. Is that correct?
Okay, so what we would do is we would take a look at this. If we can share this code, we can try and make those integrations, or at least figure out what the level of effort is to make that, and see where would we plug in this voter action in the election contract, where we can integrate this event,
Yeah.
right?
Can I suggest something?
Go ahead.
Like we can do an peer programming sort of a like online coding session and kind of try to integrate and run it. Means why I say this, I'm very confident on like the part that's or the Antelope badges part, and whatever kinks are there, we can sort out online and like try to reach that outcome soon. That everything works fine and it's ready to go for election.
Are you okay with that, Javier? You want to so I guess what you're saying, Sajid, is you want to set up another call where it's like a joint coding session.
Yeah.
Javier, do you need to look at this first before that happens?
It would be great if we can take a look at it, so we already kind of know what the different parts are.
So what if we schedule another call same time next week, and during the week, Javier, your team can look at this, and then by next Monday at 18 UTC will be the joint session that Sajid is talking about. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, Sashi, do you have this code on GitHub somewhere?
Yes, I had shared. So these integration code, I'll put it on GitHub. And then I would like, I'm sort of like happy to offer more help, like, which is I can really go over the code in that call itself. The entire purpose of like, coding it this way is that the integrations are easy. So, I can like, go over and probably help to like, literally write this code and kind of, where to put and all those things so that we can test it early.
Great. So yeah, just please get this on GitHub as soon as possible so we could start looking at it. If
Yeah.
it's not all on GitHub, that's like super ASAP, high priority. And then I'll set up another call for next week.
Yes, sure. And 19 UTC works better for me. I hope it.
Okay. Is that fine with everyone else? For next week, 19 UTC?
Yeah,
Sure,
I'm
I
trying
can
to
make it happen.
I think that's 3 p.m. my time. Yeah, that works.
It's a little tight for me, but yeah,
Okay.
make it happen. One question I had was, have we discussed where we want the issuance to occur? I don't know if that's been discussed yet, or if we have an idea if we want that to happen as soon as people, as the election is over, or once the chief delegates, the new chief delegates sign in, or in what way we're gonna have that
Good
happen,
question.
or how automatic is the process gonna be? And is the code capable of doing it?
Just to add to like, I think it's a question that I think we need to answer as a group. And just to add to it, like, I think I listened to your YouTube meeting, Jesse, and you were saying that there are 2 rounds election, or I didn't understand that part. Like, for every voting round, we want to issue.
Yeah. So if you make it through the first round, and you vote in the second round, that's another level of civil protection because you're on video twice. So
Right.
theoretically, there should be another NTT, and it's still the vote action. So from what I gather and understand, it wouldn't be that much more complicated to also issue an NTT on the second round for people who vote.
My idea was to have the SBT be the participation, the one that you get once you participate in the election. And it's evident that you are who you say you are, and you aren't cheating the system, and you've been
Yes.
legitimized as a member. Anything else you get over that would be a delegate NTT or a chief delegate NTT. You could use them or repurpose them for what you want,
Sure.
in my view.
Yeah, no, totally.
I mean, I can sign up for an election and then not show up, or I can sign up for an election and then show up and not show my face and just kind of like.
Right, but that's why I'm
Program.
saying you would only get the SBT once you've passed the first round of the election.
And how do
Once
we
you've
know
shown
they
up,
No. So you get sorry, we're mixing up SBT and NTT. I'll go with SBT because this is like
just to differentiate.
yeah. So the SBT, you get the SBT if you vote in the first round.
Exactly.
And then if you vote in the second round, that's a different SBT. Perhaps it's branded as an L1 delegate or a chief delegate, or perhaps it's not, or perhaps it's branded a different way. Or maybe we can do two, one for chief delegate or one for L1 delegate and one for extra civil protected for this election round. But I just want to make one other comment in regards to your original question, Mo. My personal, obviously I'm not a developer, but I did have some project development experience in a development environment with the bees. And we were issuing a fungible token directly after an action in real time. And that caused us problems.
I'd imagine.
What simplified it a lot for us was when the actions took place, and then we built a script to read the actions after the event. So the script came in after the event, read the actions, and then distributed the tokens. And I think we should take that same approach here.
I'd agree with that, just because I've been giving it a little bit of thought and thinking about it in terms of it might be a lot cleaner once the new chief delegates are elected and they sign in, for example, make it an MSIG. And once that happens, it automatically issues everyone that's participated their corresponding tokens. And that way it has the legitimacy of the new chief delegates.
Yeah, Sajid or Javier, what do you think? I'm okay with that.
I mean, I like the idea. Okay, we're going to adhere to a standard that allows for a whole bunch of different things to happen, right? All kinds of different tokens can be issued by different events. It still seems to be a young standard. I would want to keep it as easy as possible for this first iteration. And then the next set of CDs, we've already set a precedent. We've already laid the groundwork where they can continue to build and start adding badges, or you guys can say, guys, we've already got our framework in this system. We can continue to do other stuff. So I would really, really want to just, okay, what we're going after is civil protection. That's step one. Is we're going to have a way to call, see if you're an Eden member and see if you voted. And if those two things check out, you've got, a certain degree of civil protection. That's what we want, right? Now.
Yeah, but Javier, but what are your thoughts on the timing of when the NTT or SBT is actually issued?
What I'm thinking is you vote, the vote action calls the the logic in the Eden contract, and then once that's done, it's going to call the NTT contract and say issue it, this NTT, right? Now, if after the voting occurs, we realize, hey, these guys were really fishy, they just showed up, they voted, they left, then we would have to have a way of fixing that.
Yeah,
right?
So we have a way, that's the dispute resolution system. But what I'm thinking is just knowing the EOSIO code, if if we're linking the issuing of the NTT upon another action, what if that transaction gets lost? It's like, what if actually someone legitimately votes but did not get their NTT? What do we
That's
do?
why I'm thinking, okay, first you vote. Once the vote's registered and that's cleared through, then we move on to step 2, which is issue the NTT once we've got voting cleared. And if voting does, if the NTT or SBT, sorry, I don't.
Sorry, it's either one.
Yeah, if that fails, system continues to work. We're going to handle that error and be like, okay, that failed, but move on, move on. Okay, we're not gonna introduce any risk of like something breaking because the SBT didn't get issued.
Right. So, but if that happens, then we need a way to issue the NTT, perhaps manually as well, if there's an error in that sequence, right?
Yeah, that can also be done. I mean, you
Okay.
can, yeah, we can figure that out, do a manual way. But I mean, my thing is like, we're not going to break the flow, the user flow here. You know,
No,
you
of course
vote,
not.
and first thing, count your vote in the election. Once we are sure that the election vote resulted successfully, now let's move on to call this other action. And if that fails, just move on, right? Handle that in a way where we're not going to break the flow.
Okay,
And
so
then,
this is, sorry, Javier. So this is, you're claiming that this is, what you just said is a simpler approach compared to voting and having a script come on later and issuing it at a later time.
For example, when the chief delegates take
Right,
hold.
yeah.
well, the MSIG is done manually. So what occurs after the election is someone has to create an MSIG for the previous set of CDs to change those permissions to the new set of CDs. And we don't want to automate that in case there's a mistake in the election. You still have a manual intervention when you hand over the keys. So there's really no like programmatic way where we can say when this happens, trigger it. It's all part of like, it's all manually done. And we really haven't wanted to make that automated because that would allow for someone to just take over Eden without like, okay, we're going to create an MSIG now and have, you know, manually someone's got to, you know, do that. We don't want the contract to just change the keys right away.
Yeah. So I get that, Javier. But what about after it's just an idea, maybe it's not as good, but after the manual changeover of CDs, the new CDs then make another manual MSIG that will release the distribution of the NTTs or the SBTs. Is that not, is that a more complex way than the way you said that it's directly tied to the vote action?
Well, it's just creating more work for the delegates. I was thinking of the system just issues here.
I think the entire sorry to interrupt. See, the entire point of like running it on the blockchain is is like, you know, we want to tie these actions one to another, and like, you know, if we move out these issuance action, issuance, you know, this part, like, you know, basically I think what we're talking is we'll move this out and we'll issue it manually later through script. We are just like kind of adding on work for somebody, like, you know, somebody is going to do it, and then also there has to be code which will kind of take which will or the script, just like you were saying, you know, which will run this action. Now to this point, right, like whether things will break, what's going to happen, and stuff, right? So I think first part as a testing of this system is try to issue it manually on Jungle and see whether somebody can issue it manually. Let's say if it works manually, then it's okay to plug in over here. I don't see a reason why it will fail. Like if it works, if it works on Jungle, we establish that it works on Jungle, and then it would work on election day as well. I think that's what we will test, right? Like,
Yeah.
whether we can mock an election or not.
Like RAM necessary for issuing NFTs. Like NFTs require RAM, which means someone has to pay for that RAM. And if we don't have enough RAM available, then it could fail, right?
I think great point. Great point. I think RAM is something like while I was saying this, I totally ignored about RAM, but I think it's a good point to be prepared about it, that we add RAM to the contract, and maybe issue it manually. Like that's how I was thinking initially, issue it manually, but it adds work on someone, like I don't know who it is. Somebody
Yeah,
will have.
so there's trade-offs to every decision, right? So you just described the negative parts about doing this manually with the CDs. From my perspective, one of the positive parts, and maybe the positive part doesn't outweigh it, but when you are doing something in a live, like the election is like the live environment, like that to me is a higher probability of some error happening. Whereas, so my theory is that if we did it after the election, when the CD sign it manually, it's a lower probability of errors in the distribution of the NTTs, but it's more work for the CDs for sure. And I'm not sure if that balance even is valid because I'm not a developer, but this was my experience with the bees. However, with the bees, it was because the Twitter API wasn't handling these real-time actions. So it was like a faulty Twitter API issue. Maybe that's totally different, is not relatable to like Antelope. I don't know.
One thing we've
Let me
done
just
is-
add, can I just add on to Jesse's comment real quick, because I think it's also relevant. Add to that the question of, are we still, or would we put this all still on the burden of checking who the bad actors were on the dispute resolution system? And if so, does that change anything? Because if that's the case, then whether or not there were bad actors involved, the chief delegates have nothing to do other than sign the transmission of all of the entities to everyone or not.
Yeah, so Mo, so the bad actor thing, we're handling it in the dispute resolution process, and how
Either
that
way,
what?
either way, whether or not
Either way, so it doesn't matter if a bad actor gets one of these NTTs, because they're going to lose their Eden account, and our potential clients that we're talking to are going to have their users come in, and that's gonna that code that they plug into is going to check their Eden account first, and then if they have an NTT. So if they don't have both, they're not going to be qualified as civil checked.
So then that kind of eliminates the benefit of automating it to the point of voting. Doesn't
One
it?
thing we could do is, we've got a series of cron jobs that run on Eden. So funds have to be distributed. There's an action that distributes funds that's called via cron job. There's a garbage collector that gets called via a cron job. What we could do is we can say, okay, on the 8th of every day at the 6th hour when the elections are over, call the NTT distribution, similar to how we call the distribution of funds. And then basically the elections just add the events to the table, and then the actual minting occurs post-election via like a cron job that's done automatically. The CDs don't have to move a finger, but we don't do it all at the same time. We kind of wait until the end of the election and then issue all the NTTs.
This sounds like a good compromise. We actually used a cron job at the bees. That's exactly how we did it at the bees. And it sounds like a good compromise to me. I don't know. What do you think, Mo?
Sounds good. To my understanding, if I understand correctly, it still automates it, and it moves the process along a little bit.
Can Javier or Sajid, do you acknowledge, or is there any validity to what I was saying, that if we're doing it during the election, it's higher probability of errors?
Yeah, agree. I think it's safe to do first run, or I think we can integrate into Eden code later. So that way we won't have to change Eden code at all.
Yeah, I mean, Eden code I know works as is. If we had an election tomorrow, it's gonna work out. If we start changing things, then I don't.
It would reduce the risk, right, Javier? If we did the cron job, what you were saying.
Would, but then we would also have to somehow make some changes to smart contract that's going to feed that cron job with what I mean, I'd have to look into it. Now, I also have to see how the framework works and if we can do it like that, right?
Okay.
But yeah, I like the idea of doing it after the election and automating it and trying to minimize as much as we can any code changes to the election code. Because like I said, I know it works right now, but
Right.
change something, I don't know if it works.
So it sounds like we have consensus. That's great.
Yeah, and I think we can test it, like, we don't need to wait till elections, coming elections. We can test it, like, for prior elections.
We can set up elections,
It's done.
Yeah,
every
let's
day and just, but we need people to show up and vote, and like, we don't really have to talk much. We just have to like show up at our rooms, vote. So we did like 3 mock elections before the previous mock election, before the previous election, because we wanted to make sure everything was working on our.
Javier, could we do a mock election next Monday during this time as our time next Monday? And then we can test, like,
Well, we would have to have the code changes ready to run the mock election.
okay,
Right
so
now,
maybe in 2 weeks is a good goal for the mock election.
And how many people would we need?
Okay.
Well,
I have one question, like, before we jump into mock election, like, what if we are not going to integrate, or like if the issuance is manual, what?
No, it's not
exactly-
manual. It's not. It's a cron job.
Yes. So what? Okay. So yeah, what would like we test during that mock election? Like, maybe that's my question. What are we test? What part of the flow are we testing in that thing?
Well, we don't know yet because Javier needs to look at the code and he needs to make a determination. But whatever it is, we're going to test something during a mock election. And maybe I'm just trying to like say, okay, is 2 weeks? I'm trying to get like the time frame here. Is that enough time to review the code, Javier, and get it integrated into Jungle 4 to do a test election?
Okay, so I'm thinking we already have changes to a table when people vote, right? We've already got data on who voted in our current contracts. Can we set up an action that's independent from the election contract that reads the members table, see who voted, and then based on who voted, then determines which SBTs get issued, and kind of run that auxiliary to the election process? So basically use the existing tables in the Enon smart contract to feed the parameters needed to issue the NTTs post-election. Does that make sense? So we don't really change anything in the election flow. We kind of add this event tables. We populate the event table post the election through a cron job. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud. I'd like to study this a bit more and come up with a possible solution. Maybe next week we can pair program on it after we've taken a look at the code, and then second that
was good.
Yeah. So I think what it would probably mean is, like, I think most probably, if most probably no changes in this elections code. So still this code, hidden validate code, is something else that Javier, that you might have to write, that who has the authority of issuing these badges and things like that. A pretty simple code, like, most probably, the sample that I have will work. So this is I'll put this in GitHub, and then you can kind of take a look. Some additional work, like, just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, but I'm thinking the Genesis.Eden contract is the only one allowed to issue those tokens. Like, no, wouldn't it be that the same smart contract?
I think it would now if it is manual, it will be some so you're saying, I think so you're saying that we'll have multi-sig from chief delegates for every issuance, is it?
Certain actions, like if I want, anyone can call the distribute function, right? The distribute function basically gives people their money, but it's done from this Genesis Eden smart contract, and the contract has access to the funds, but it's only going to deposit to those who are elected delegates. Anyone can trigger that action. doesn't need special permission to distribute the NTT. So the cron job can call it and say, hey, distribute the funds. But it doesn't, anyone can call that. It's not going to give NTTs to just anyone. It's obviously going to give the NTTs to the right people and under the right circumstances. But the actual permission to call the action doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be chief delegates who call that, right? Like, you know, hey, I'm going to give you your rightfully earned SBT. There's no risk in someone like, it's not like someone can issue an SBT on behalf of Eden for someone who didn't participate in the election, because all those checks are in place. And it's like, well, I'm only going to issue those SBTs that are like legitimate, right?
Got it. Makes sense. So I thought earlier that I'll also share this new badge like that we have. So maybe this, so like I also coded like this something called series badge. It's probably going to be helpful in something like elections where we want to see somebody's participation one election after another. I was able to kind of run it on Jungle and see, like, you know, if so maybe like you can see if it is helpful or not. We will quickly share the data here, like how it looks like. It would sort of make sense when looking at the data.
Sorry, can you say what are we looking at here?
Different from what we were discussing earlier. So this is like a new badge called a series badge. So it kind of captures somebody's consecutive participation, like, you know, in election. So like, let's say I participated in current election, I participate in next election, and so on. So it will kind of help capture that data that, you know,
I get it.
Somebody is participating in.
I like all those additional use cases, and I think that's like justifies why we're going this route. But like, if we can keep the scope to just like, what do we need for basic civil protection now, and the next term, we can like continue this project with guys, wherever the next CDs are, like we set this up so we can do all kinds of really cool stuff. And
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're good for now. But if you want to show us something real quick, Sajid, go ahead.
So this is what I wanted to show here. So call this as instead of Scrum 1, call it as elections, and then or instead of Scrum here, call it as election, and this is as election 1, and then this is the sequence ID here, like, you know, what election is here, or which election number is here, and then user is issued badge with this metadata here. But maybe like, I think it's out of the scope of this discussion. I think maybe it's more relevant to what Mo and I am working on.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording.